We got a new op-ed. It's out now in SFGATE. It's entitled, "We're pro-vaccine, but we can't support California lawmakers' school COVID vaccine mandate." This is about a new mandate that's pending in the state legislation. The subtitle of this op-ed is entitled, "Two Physician Epidemiologists Argue That the Costs Outweigh the Benefits of This Policy." It's by myself and Tracy Beth Hogg, and physician epidemiologist who I respect a great deal. This is about a piece of state legislation that's now pending, and it's going to try to mandate kids get vaccine. And we're talking about K through 12 kids getting a mandated COVID-19 vaccine, or they get thrown out of school January 1st, 2023. And it's a tough one. There's no exceptions in this bill. It's a very tough one. It's a very stringent one. There are very few exceptions, I'll put it that way. I think it's bad policy. It's bad policy for a few reasons. So let's run through those reasons, which we detail in this op-ed. I'll put a link down below to the op-ed so you can check it out. The first reason it's a bad policy is, well, why are they doing it? And the person who's proposed this, the legislator, says that we're doing it to, quote, keep kids safe and keep schools open. But the truth is, this COVID-19 vaccine has low and dwindling vaccine effectiveness against the Omicron variant. It's an old ancestral strain, the Wuhan strain mRNA sequence inserted in a vaccine. But now we're here in the world of Omicron. And it's not the Omicron in that vaccine. It's something different. And as a result, it has some limited vaccine effectiveness. Different series put it at different numbers, but we know it's not 100%. A lot of people are having breakthroughs who've been vaccinated and boosted, and that will likely happen with kids too. So by doing this mandatory policy, you're not going to prevent these kids from getting COVID. They'll get it anyway. You're not going to prevent them from spreading COVID. They'll be able to spread it as well. That's the problem with vaccine effectiveness in this range. It's not going to be able to halt transmission. And those two facts are very different than the measles vaccine. And by the way, Tracy and I are supporters of mandatory measles vaccination and other childhood vaccines. This is just a different situation, and different situations warrant a different tact. We're supporters of mandatory vaccines. They've done a lot of good, but you can't apply the same hammer to a new nail if that nail is fundamentally different. It's not a nail, it's a screw. It requires a different sort of tool. So what are the other problems with this? Well, the other problem is the penalty. Now, people always raise the analogy of seatbelts, and they say, look, we're doing this for your own sake, just like seatbelt laws. It's for your own sake. And I say, well, the penalty for not buckling up, what is it, a ticket? $100, $200? The penalty for this is you're going to take these children and throw them out of school for a long period of time. You're going to throw them out until they comply. And that's a very draconian penalty. The penalty is just too much. You're costing them so much of their future after you've already failed them. Let's not forget, you have failed them because you closed your school for 18 months in a lot of these places in California. You have failed these children. You don't need a policy that throws them out. No. You need to collect them all. Make sure they're well. Do a head count. When you realize you're still missing some because they've slipped through the cracks of your broken system, you need to go find those kids, bring them back, and start to heal them. COVID is not their biggest worry. You closing schools was a bigger worry. So if you're going to use schools as the punishment against these kids, I vehemently disagree. You're going to hurt these kids far more than any good you think you're doing for them. That's a very bad policy idea. It's not proportionate. It's not just in this situation. It's also, unfortunately, going to further exacerbate structural vulnerabilities. Who are the kids that didn't comply when Los Angeles County was on the precipice of implementing their misguided vaccine mandate for 12 to 15? I wrote about that in U.S. News & World Report. It was misguided. I knew it was not going to end well. And just as they're about to do it, they count up how many tens of thousands of kids they're going to have to throw out of school. And they look and they see they're not just any child. They're more likely to be socioeconomically disadvantaged or from racial minority groups. That is not just. That is really bad. That is the structural racism that we supposedly are trying to solve. This bill is going to insert that back into society because there is a difference in uptakes between very rich, advantaged, some race people and disadvantaged people and different racial groups. There are differences in the uptake among their kids. And insofar as those differences exist, a policy that uses that as a cause to exclude them from school may further exacerbate socioeconomic and racial disadvantages. And we don't want to do that. That's a very bad idea. Now, this bill has, I think, other problems. I mean, the other problem it has is it doesn't allow any customization or nuance. If it's a child that had one dose of vaccine and then they had an Omicron breakthrough, do they really need the second dose? Question mark. Denmark tells parents that if your child, 5 to 11-year-old, had COVID-19, they're a healthy kid that had COVID-19, they don't need the vaccine. Sweden says if you have a healthy kid 5 to 11, they don't need the vaccine at all. And yet here we are going to come so heavy-handed into this space of massive scientific uncertainty and say not only do you need 2 doses, they have to be on our schedule and you got to do them, we're going to throw you out of school. That is just too much. There's just too much scientific uncertainty here. This other vaccines, the MMR vaccine, exist under a biological licensing agreement. This vaccine exists under an emergency use authorization. It's a different regulatory pathway with substantively more uncertainty. That's why it exists. And it's a pathway that requires more data, more nuance before you go through with any sort of policy like this. There's a reason why this is the only such bill across the country, because it's too strong. It's just too much. It's not proportionate. I've never been a fan of the anti-vax forces. For more than a decade, they've been putting out propaganda and doing a great disservice to this country, I think, because a lot of what they say is incorrect and irrational. But we got to be real careful, those of us who are scientists in the center, that we don't become anti-vax, take extreme positions on the other side merely to take those positions. But that's what this bill does. There's a big center ground, which is, yes, it's now EUA authorized. Let parents choose. 20% have, but 80% are reluctant. That's the 5 to 11-year-old statistic. 70-80% are reluctant. Let them have some space. Let's learn some more information. Should we space out the doses? Might we need to adjust the dose in the 5-6-year-old group? Might we need to change the dose in the 10-11-year-old group? Does a 12-year-old need the same dose as a 80-year-old? These are all important and valid scientific questions. This bill doesn't account for myocarditis, which is known to affect boys between the ages of, say, 12 and 26, and worse with dose 2, worse with Moderna. Other countries are trying to space the doses apart. Shouldn't we explore that before we mandate this policy? So find a way to mitigate the harms? And if you've had Omicron, do you really benefit from vaccination? I listened to that Paul Offit interview with Z-Dog, learning that it was such a close vote in the administration whether to consider natural immunity the same. That could very much change. A healthy child who's 6 who had an Omicron infection, do they need vaccination? It's an open scientific question. Our European nations, they disagree with us. And let me say this. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland. These are not nations known for hating children. These are nations that love children. In fact, they invest much more per capita in children in times of peace. They've always invested more in kids. And so when they are reluctant to push mass vaccination campaigns, or when they insert different rules for dose 2 or spread the doses apart as we did in Norway for adolescent boys, they're doing so often with good intentions, with wisdom, looking at the same data that we're looking at here. This bill doesn't allow any of that. It's just too strong, it's too forceful, it's too soon. And, I see the allure in coming across as a strong pro-vax person, but you can do a lot of harm. You can do a lot of harm by having good intentions. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I worry that this is in that camp. So COVID-19 is here with us indefinitely, and nobody wants kids to suffer from this disease. And right now, I think parents should be empowered to make the right choice with their doctor. For kids with comorbidities and vulnerabilities, I think it's a clear decision. Get those children vaccinated, work with your pediatrician, make that call. For healthy kids or kids who've had and recovered from COVID-19, that requires nuance. That's not a clear-cut decision. It requires nuance. And, you could talk to experts from Sweden and Finland, as I do routinely as part of my research group. They view it a little bit differently than we do in the United States. And it's certainly not the place where what you want to do, what you absolutely do not want to do, is make a policy like this that's going to throw those kids out of school if they don't comply. That is going to do a lot more harm to society. And I just don't see what the gain is. You're not going to halt COVID-19. You're not going to make schools safer. I'm sorry. They're not going to be safe because, one, whether a kid is vaccinated or not and they get COVID-19, they do very, very well. We now have data from Germany on healthy children. We know that no children between the ages of 5 and 11 who were healthy, who got COVID, died in the country of Germany in the period of that study. That's really pretty good. I mean, there are some ICU visits, sure, but they are low. Less than 10 per 100,000. That's low. And that's unvaccinated kids. Is it possible that vaccines improve those odds? Sure, it's possible, but that's not the space that you need to be issuing brute force mandates without taking into account that it might be different if somebody had and recovered from COVID-19, because all of those figures will plummet because the risk of reinfection and bad outcomes from reinfection is very, very low in people who have natural immunity. And in fact, there are articles in the BMJ that suggest that some nations think, and some experts think, that COVID-19 in children should be something they're allowed to be exposed to and overcome, and that will build the more durable immunity for the long haul. And we can't forget that this mRNA construct that's in this vaccine, that's the original Wuhan ancestral strain. We've got Omicron now. It's a slightly different spike protein. It has a different appearance in three-dimensional space. And so you're compelling people to get an older vaccine. Right now, Pfizer, Moderna, they're pushing the new vaccine construct in clinical trials. Why don't we wait to see what that shows? There's no reason for this. So this is not good policy. This is the kind of policy that energizes a very powerful base, but the truth is fundamentalism in all its forms is bad. Fundamentalism is bad when it's anti-vax, and fundamentalism is bad when it's anti-anti-vax. Science and truth is in the middle. It's nuanced. This is a vaccine still under auspices of EUA. We don't know all the facts about it. The safety signal is changing. We may yet find better ways to give it. Change the dose a little bit, spread the dose apart, have different rules for natural immunity. That may make it safer and better. And once we optimize that, once it gets BLA, then if you want to have the mandate, if it still makes sense, then let's have that dialogue. But right now, it's premature. It's too early. It's not a good bill. And so I encourage you all to read our piece in SFGATE. We're pro-vaccine, but we can't support California lawmakers' school COVID vaccine mandate. I see that the sponsor of the bill has checked out the piece, and I don't think he's too happy with us. But, it's nothing personal. It's nothing personal. It's easy for people to get policy wrong. This is a bad policy. It's just bad on the face of it. It's going to hurt a lot more kids than it helps. It doesn't really solve the problem in the time. It doesn't account for all these nuances. And it's nothing personal. It's just bad policy. And you got to call out bad policy when you see it, when it's going to be large and sweeping and affect millions of children. That's when it deserves to be called out. So I hope you enjoyed this video. This is what you get on this channel. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message below. Until next time.